Hey y'all, it's Tim, the co-host of the Trailer Park Podcast. On this show, we bring you podcast trailers so that you can discover your next favorite show. Or if you're a creator, we want to help you get your show into the ears of your ideal listener. We are still in between seasons, and Arielle and I have been working hard on bringing you some bonus content. This time around, we are sharing something a little different. A deep dive interview with Grant Hill, the creator of Serum, one of the trailers we featured in Season 1. Serum is a narrative podcast, and narrative pods are typically scripted and meticulously put together and take a long time to produce. But I've always found them mysterious and a little out of reach for the DIY podcaster. Grant and I discussed the misconceptions and lessons learned of creating narrative podcasts, and some tips on how to start this journey into narrative. Before we go any further, let's make sure we're all on the same page. If you missed it, during Season 1 of TPP, we featured the trailer for Serum. Take a second to go listen to that if you haven't already. If you have, awesome. Here's a refresher for everyone. Reporter Grant Hill stumbles into a cab after a long night out. A conversation with the driver leads to a startling revelation. The driver claims to be a Hollywood insider who helped the doctor develop a potential cure for AIDS in the 90s. His Hollywood claims turn out to be true. But what about this cure for AIDS? A search turns up a black physician named Gary Davis from Tulsa, Oklahoma, who had a big dream to use goat antibodies to develop a serum that would free the world from HIV and AIDS. What happened to the dream? And why did so many fear for the doctor's life? I was absolutely gripped by the trailer. So, without further ado, here's my interview with Grant Hill. Grant Hill, welcome to the Trailer Park Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
So, I was introduced to Serum because we selected your trailer as one of the ones we featured on Trailer Park. And it's just a testament to what trailers can do to pique someone's interest. I personally am invested in learning about narrative podcasts. It's one of my favorite genres of podcasts, but I think there might be some misconceptions about what they are and what it takes to create them. So from your perspective, what do you think is a common misconception about narrative podcasts?
In my experience, we were able to do Serum with less resources than one might expect. And I think what I really like about narrative podcasts is probably one of its biggest misconceptions, which is that like it takes a lot of money to produce. I mean, it does, and it should. I mean, you could do a lot more with more money, you know what I mean? But I think we were able to make Serum I used the same recorder, the same microphone, like everywhere I went, because that's all I had at that time. So it definitely would have been easier with more resources. But I think being really resourceful and using what you have is infinitely more valuable than like the best mic. I will say, if I had more resources, it would have been able to travel more. Like a lot of that stuff I had to do on my own at first before this became like a bigger production.
So it certainly can cost a lot, depending on the equipment, depending on the travel, and then just the hours, like the work hours it takes to put it together. But with making Serum, it sounds like what you're saying is it didn't cost as much as you would think.
I got into podcasting, I think, because video to me there seemed so many barriers to entry when it came to video. And with podcasting, it's fundamentally, at the start at least, it's you with a microphone. From there, bringing in really talented people to help you edit it, to help you mix it really nicely, to put it all together, that does take money and that takes resources. But what I mean is the barrier to entry to do this initially is relatively low. Obviously, you need the time and you need to have, some equipment and some kind of access to those bare minimums. But I think anyone who has found a really good story and has the kind of the time to dig into it could essentially make one of these things, which is what I love about the medium and what I love about narrative podcasts is that it's such a good launching off point to tell stories that maybe, would be a great movie or something, but you just wouldn't even know how to approach that, especially if you're not like within that industry. And I think that's just really is what captures my imagination about podcasts. It's because it's like anything is possible because all I need really is my microphone, my computer, and like a plane ticket. Now that's where the money comes
right,
in. But,
exactly. Now, were you trained specifically in narrative podcasts, or because like I've never taken a podcasting class in my life. I just did it, So what about you? Like, how did you get into this podcasting in general?
Sure. So in undergrad, I studied journalism. I majored in journalism, but at the time they didn't have a podcasting class. But what happened was actually the chief of police for my hometown, a small hometown in New Jersey, he became the first American police officer in over a decade to be charged with a hate crime. And so that was right before my last year of undergrad. And I was really, it was out of nowhere for me. I think others in the community weren't surprised at all. But for me, it was like, wow, this is so random. And I started digging into the story a little bit, what like local news coverage. And, at the same time, this is when papers, as they still are, they were paring back on local news coverage, they were laying off reporters. So I just wanted to know more about this. And as I started to learn more about it, I was like, this might be a good podcast. And I'd never made one before, but I did have experience with music, working with dolls and everything like that. So I thought it was something that I could at least have the technical ability to start. I didn't know about finish at that point. And I still don't know about finish. It takes a lot of help for me. That was kind of my first foray. So I ended up spending like 8 months or so with a terrible recorder, with a microphone in my dorm room, and creating this 5-part pop investigative podcast just all about the case. I was truly like whatever less than a cub reporter was, like, just with a microphone and a dream trying to tell this story. And like going back now, I cringe at how it sounds now, but I was really proud of it at the time. It felt like the first time I did something within journalism that I was like really, really proud of. And then from there, I started working. I did a couple internships in podcasting because I loved the form. I loved the medium. And then when this story came up, I was like, oh my God, well, here it is. I gotta, really juice this one for all it's worth.
So from the first idea or even conception of Serum, and I would assume that would be when you met your friend in the cab or the Uber, whatever it was. From that point to when it was finally launched in September of 2022, like how long was that process?
So we were still kind of really in the thick of, as I'm sure anybody who's made this kind of stuff before, like you're in the thick of it until it's over. We were very much working on the last episode until the day before the last episode launched, if I remember correctly. So that process was a little over 3 years from the moment I got in the cab until when the last episode was released.
Wow. When you were publishing the episodes, and I think there was like 7, right?
There were 9. 9
okay.
in total.
So, and you published them every week?
Yes. Yep.
So this is something I've always wondered about a series, because let's say you have episode 1, it's ready. You're going to launch it. Do you have all of the other episodes already done? And then you tweak it as you go along as like the weeks, or there's probably not a rule to that, but how did that work out for you?
I worked really closely with Mike and Scott, who's the host of the Pulse for WHYY, and she really shepherded me through this whole process. So she was doing an entire other show while we were putting this together, which how she did that, I have no idea. I do not understand it. I still don't understand it. But so we were both kind of doing, this wasn't like our full-time thing. We were kind of, it was mine, but I had no idea what I was doing. So it was much more of a burden for her. But so while she was working on that show, we were actively still writing and producing to get these episodes together. I mean, it was crazy. It was absurd. We had the first half of the season. We knew, and we had that basically recorded and pre-produced, and then we would tweak it as we got closer. So the first 4 to 5 episodes we had pretty much in the can. We just needed to make some tweaks. And then once the first episode was produced, I think we were working on, or once the first episode was released, we were still working on 6 through 9. And then so that just became this strange process of tweaking before the week before the release, while also working on scripts and fact checking and seeing what we're going to need to produce the next or the last 3 episodes. So we were under the gun almost every week. It felt like a sprint, at the same time a marathon. So it was very bizarre. I don't think this is normally how it goes, but it was in that true. Serum could have been produced no other way, because it was like literally me with my microphone doing 2 jobs at once, and it was held together with like glue and duct tape. And then at the end, it just came out, and we were proud of it, but we were like, I don't know how we were able to do this. It was a miracle that we were able to do it.
Yeah. So it sounds like you have this plan where you're sketching out episodes, you're writing the script, you're tweaking and producing. And then as you go along, you're like, oh, well, we really need to do something about, what's going to happen in episode 8 or episode 9. And then it's you and your producers kind of just working together to make it all happen. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the most interesting things that or issues that we had to deal with was opening loops in the first episode. We were like, oh, we'll close that in later episodes. And now you have this, you're writing out this structure for, an episode 7 or 8. And you're like, where do I close that? Like, I got to close the loop. How do I close it? Where do I close it? And so that kind of problem solving, I think, was one of the most challenging things for us. But miraculously, I think we were able to find ways to close each loop. And hopefully it felt like that.
Yeah. 2 questions. Do you think you could have done this by yourself?
Absolutely not. No.
Yeah.
I mean, no way. I think the reporting was mostly me, but I submitted we sat down for an edit. It was me, Mike, and 2 other reporters for the Pulse for the first episode. And man, my intro was just, I thought about it way too much. It's the intro to the whole series.
Yeah.
So you have all this time to over intellectualize everything. And I got in there and they were just like, what the hell is this? And I was like, no, this is how it needs to be. And I just thank my lucky stars that everybody was in that room to say, you've got to change your outlook on this, and you've got to change, how you're writing this, what you're thinking about, because it just wasn't working without Mike and without the help from our engineer Charlie and the 2 reporters that helped edit this. This would never have taken shape.
It's such a pleasure to speak with you, because I consume a lot of narrative podcasts, and I've always wanted to be able to talk with someone who produced one and ask these questions. So this is not only helpful for me, but for our listeners. So let's talk about tools and specifically equipment. You said that you were using pretty much the same kind of recorder throughout the whole series. So what are you using?
I'm using a Zoom H6, and I don't know what this mic is even called.
So you had the shotgun mic on the H6.
Well, at times I did. I bought that shotgun for my trip to Tulsa because I was like, I'm going to need something that's going to be able to withstand the wind. I actually don't think I actually didn't have the shotgun mic for Tulsa. I had whatever the stereo, mic that it comes with.
Right.
Is. So at times I would use that, and then at times I would use this Audio Technica. I don't even know what a condenser mic essentially.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then I prefer the Audio Technica, and I just hold it using my hand because that's all I don't have a fancy microphone holder. And it seems to do the job. I mean, sometimes you would hear my rustling of my hand moving or whatever, and at times it was very windy, which I loathed when I heard it back. But yeah, I mean, I'm not like a gearhead type of guy, so I probably could have got so much better sound had I consulted someone before all this. But for me, I'm just more like, hey, I got this equipment, I'm going to make the most of it, and I think it worked out. And I feel this way I have a pet peeve with tape syncs, like when people use tape syncs for in audio in narrative podcasts. When the host is on like a call with a source or whatever, it should sound like a phone call in my mind.
Yeah,
because it just breaks the wall of you're not really there with him. For me, that takes me out of the thing. If something doesn't sound as good as it could, I tend to be a little more forgiving of that because I don't know. I think it shows you a little bit about the show and who's making it and what resources they have. And it brings you more to that story. So maybe that's just how I justify the bad sound to myself. So I don't know.
I think there's an argument to be made either way, but I like that justification.
Thanks. I appreciate it. That's what I'm going with.
Okay. All right. So what about, we at the beginning we talked about a misconception that narrative podcasts cost a lot of money, but it does cost money. So what were your major funding sources?
Yeah. So originally for the first year and a half, I didn't have any. So I was just paying for this out of my pocket. It was the pandemic. So I had a lot of time on my hands. Obviously, at first I didn't have anything. And then when I went to Tulsa, that's when Mikan reached out and was like, hey, we could probably get a grant for something like this. So I was able to secure a grant from WHYY. That was a very modest grant, I think, which I don't have a problem with. I'm an unproven person with the crazy AIDS cure story. So, I understand. But that helped a lot. That helped for travel. And I mostly spent it on travel.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I haven't made any money from this. And I think what's more remarkable is the fact that Mikan and Charlie at HYY, Charlie is our engineer, they both did the second job during the time when they were doing their normal job. And then so when I say it doesn't cost a lot of money, I mean, personally, I was able to do this with that modest grant that just paid for travel, but I didn't pay myself. And they weren't being paid, as far as I know, more than what their, everyday salary is. So that costs money, and it should cost money to pay people for doing this type of work. I don't mean to say people shouldn't get paid. I just mean to say you can still create a product with a small travel budget that I think can carry a story through 9 episodes.
And you got to have people believe in what you're doing. But yeah, if you just counted up all the hours that you put in and anyone that helped you and paid their quote unquote wage, it would cost a lot.
As it should. It's hard work. But I just think this was a story that just kind of captured our imagination and it's something that we felt like we had to work on, whether, at least I felt I had to work on whether I was getting paid or not. So maybe that was a terrible career move. And from now on, no one will pay me, but I don't know.
So what are the things that you would have done differently or maybe some just general lessons learned?
Well, although it helps to be under the gun a little bit with timing to get stuff done and to force the creative juices to flow rather than wait for them to come, come flowing. I do wish we had less time under the gun. I wish that there was a little less of a time crunch at the end to while we were tweaking episodes for that week, also writing episodes and that would come out in the next 2 weeks, which we would have to produce while we tweaked the episodes before that. So it just became very chaotic in that way. It would have been nice to schedule that out a little bit better, but I think that it was like a do or die type thing where we had to set a date to get it out, or else we would have never gotten it. We would have just kept tweaking and kept tweaking. So yeah, it's a little bit of a double-sided thing there.
Well, another thing is, so at the end of the series, I'm not going to be able to describe this the way that I want to, but at the end of the series, it was like, you're kind of like, oh my gosh, I have more ideas about what is happening here, what is happening with the doctor, what is happening, potential cover up, and you start like, you get your recorder out and you are just unloading into your recorder about all of these different ideas, and that's how you end the series. And I was just like, oh my gosh. But I guess that was the point, right? It's like you could just keep on going forever with the different theories and the different rabbit holes that you can go down.
Yeah, and it was important for us to feel like there were elements of closure throughout the series. Like, we did find out more about, the doctor's most famous patient. We got a more fuller story. We did find out who might still have versions of this treatment out there and who might still be providing it to people, and more about those people. So it was very important for me to not like completely do the typical narrative podcast thing of, there's no answer. It's the lesson along the way type of thing, which is, I get it, because it's for so many stories, there's not going to be closure. There's not going to be this feeling of an end. But I don't know. I guess that you can do that with anything. And the point of that ending to me was like, it's the really compelling thing about rumors and conspiracy theories or like folklore or whatever. It's like you can go on and on and on and drive yourself mad. And I think a lot of people, especially with this case, who were involved with it, who believed in it or who didn't believe in it, who wanted to prove it wrong. It's just one of those stories where you can go insane just thinking about the possibilities. And I certainly did, I got lured into this loop, and it made me understand more the people who wouldn't talk to me because, they, at some point they just decided to let it go. And that's probably the wise thing to do with a lot of things, but I don't know.
When the series was published, did you get any sort of negative feedback from anyone? Like, you shouldn't be telling this story or anything like that?
A lot less than I thought we would. I was really prepared for that type of reaction, which I understand the hesitation. I mean, it is, the AIDS crisis is an obviously extremely serious thing, and people lived through it and are still kind of traumatized by what they went through during that time. And to kind of tell that story with that in mind, I knew it was going to be a little bit of a high wire act to not go too far to completely alienate folks who, are offended by the idea that there are things that we weren't told about the crisis, or that, the potential for someone to take this story and extrapolate from it and potentially do something detrimental to their own health because they believe in something that isn't proven. I totally get that. But I think we went in to tell this story with that in mind. And while we did get a few, tweets about, that this is ridiculous, why would you tell this story? And I understand that opinion, but I think the story's more than just about the alleged cure or the treatment. It's about how people react to crisis. It's about this complicated dynamic of, a Black physician who, at least it appears, wasn't treated fairly by white medical establishment figures. And it's about distrust in the government and in the kind of medical establishment, which I think we all can understand, unfortunately, now going through the pandemic and everything. So I take that criticism very, very seriously, and I don't want to make light of it. But ultimately, I think it was an important story. And I think we trusted that an audience would get what we were doing rather than sow doubt. We were trying to, I think, shed light on this corner of the world and this corner of, or this perspective rather. And I think many of the people that we talked to for this story got that. And I hopefully that comes through in the podcast. But, actually the feedback has been relatively positive. So I'm really grateful for that.
As someone who is not a conspiracy theorist at all, listening to Serum, I was definitely more open to, maybe there is something to this, and I shared that I was listening to this series with a friend of mine who definitely is on the other side of that spectrum. And he's, what? You mean Anthony Fauci and the NIH are, up to no good and they're corrupt? Like, of course they are.
Yeah. Which is funny because before I did this, I felt like I was almost I started the project almost like trying to debunk what I was told in the cat. What if I could debunk it? Which is there's a lot of problems with that perspective.
Sure.
And I think I learned a lot, and my perspective changed throughout the reporting process, which maybe comes through in the podcast. But I think going through that journey from being on the one side of that, conspiracy theories are all, BS, it's all a coping mechanism or something like that, or it's all wild, to what is that journey like to then teeter on the edge of the other side and see that other side? And maybe if you're on the other side, pull yourself in a little bit towards not everything is a conspiracy theorist. Sometimes, there are other issues that are going on that aren't the most wild kind of explanation. So I really wanted to try to bring both of those sides a little bit closer to one another to create some sort of understanding. I don't know if it worked, but that's just definitely what I was experiencing as I was reporting on the project.
Let's pivot to the trailer. This is the Trailer Park Podcast. So how important was it to have a compelling trailer for the series?
I thought it was everything because we were just kind of coming out of nowhere. We had no history as a podcast. It was nice to lean on WHYY's kind of credibility and their amazing journalism and as well as the Pulse. They've been doing this for, I think, 10 years now. So, which I'm now a reporter at the Pulse. So I guess I should say we, but I just joined. So I'm still going to say they. But we could lean on that credibility, but it was very important for us to come up really from the get-go, try to promise a lot in this series. That's why I listened to the episode featuring Serum, obviously. And one of you guys said, we're not going to tell you the length of the trailer because we didn't want to dissuade you from listening, right. Which I totally get. And it was a long trailer, but I really wanted to try to hit on each element so that each element, by that I mean each corner of the story, like the FBI, the CIA, the Anthony Fauci, the different kind of things that make up my skepticism at the beginning. We really wanted to try to promise all those dynamic little I guess appetizers so that you were hit with a sound collage of questions that you needed to go to the series just to understand what the series was about. You know what I mean? I felt like we wanted to go so broad with it where you were like, I don't get what this is, but in a positive way, which I guess is maybe not the ideal form of a trailer where you're supposed to explain what it is so that it entices people. We kind of wanted to invert it, I guess, and just be like, just leave the listener with more questions than answers. So it was important. I don't know if it was successful, but we certainly thought about it a lot. Even as we were writing the scripts, we were like, we got to put this in the trailer. We got to put that element in the trailer, and making notes of what sound bites might work, because we knew that a lot was riding on it for listenership because we just didn't have any prior history.
So a question came to mind about just metrics in general. Do you know how well the series, as far as, I think, gosh, I don't know if I looked this up on Chartable or not, but how were downloads, how were like that stuff? If you don't want to talk about that, that's fine, but I just thought I'd ask.
I don't have a problem talking about it. I don't know if the station has a problem with it, so I'm gonna be more conservative about
Sure.
the answers that I give, just because I don't know what the protocol is there. But I will say, as far as I'm aware, I think we are the station's most successful limited run series, which I'm really proud of. And we have gotten more downloads than I think a lot of people expected us to, especially because we didn't put any, as far as I'm aware, any money in advertising the thing. So because of that, I'm really proud of the amount of downloads that we got. Do I think we could have had more? You can always have more.
Right, exactly.
But I think, as far as I'm aware, it's been successful. Relatively successful. It's not, we created cereal or whatever, but it's been relatively successful.
Fantastic. I want to ask you two more questions. So one about any tips for podcasters who want to break into the narrative podcast space. And then the next question is about music. I totally forgot to add music in here because you created some of the music. You wrote some of the music, right?
Yeah. So a few songs I worked with a buddy of mine, Brandon Tomei, who's a really talented musician. And then, as any person who makes podcasts know, you always need more music than you think you're going to need. So when we were kind of in the middle of producing a lot of this stuff, we just realized we need a lot more music and a variety of it. So I basically just used Logic and my keyboard to come up with stuff on the fly as we were making it, which I actually really enjoyed that part of the process. I think to be able to like make music specifically for a scene or specifically for a vibe, like that you can tweak in real time, was so fun. It was one of the most enjoyable parts of making the podcast, was being able to kind of, craft that vibe in real time. So I love that.
As a musician, I appreciated the music and the themes that went along throughout the whole series. I thought it was brilliant. And especially the music in the trailer really grabs. And, it is the central theme throughout all the episodes, but well done. Well done.
Thanks so much. I appreciate that. I was really hoping that people would like the music because I spent way too much time thinking about it. And to everyone else on the project's, I guess, detriment. So I'm sorry to them, but yeah, I appreciate the kind words.
Yeah, no problem. All right. So any tips for podcasters who, want to break in a narrative and maybe just feel like, I don't know, they can't? Any words of wisdom?
I think it just comes down to the story. I got really lucky with this story, which is that from the get-go, I had no idea what the story was about. And I still don't know what the fundamental I don't know the fundamental answer to the questions presented in this story, which you would say, oh, well, that, maybe that's a flaw. And maybe it is. At the beginning of many podcasts, the hosts will say, this is a story about, and then they give you like 3 themes of what the story is going to be about. And I just think, don't you want the listener to, like in a movie, you wouldn't hear somebody directly to the camera say to the camera, this movie is about love and hardship or whatever. It's, part of the fun of listening to a story is figuring out what it's about yourself and what it means to you. And so I think for anybody who wants to break into narrative podcasts, it's really fundamentally about the story. You can have the best equipment in the world, but if you know what the story is about 5 minutes after you become really interested in it, I don't know if it's going to carry the amount of episodes that you're going to want to produce about. And so I think that's just what I've learned is like, because I've had other ideas before for stories. And then after doing this, I realized, man, I'm so glad I didn't make that, because it would have it's just not enough. There's just not enough there not enough mystery. You're just going to need a big story to carry all the episodes, I think. And the other tip is just, I don't know, don't be scared to do it. It's like dipping your toe into like water and you've never swam before. Like you get in and you get a little more comfortable, and then you get in a little bit. And like each time you talk to somebody new about this, whatever the thing you're doing the podcast on is about, you start to really think to yourself, oh, I'm actually really doing this. I'm actually making this podcast, I guess. And then you talk to like 10 people and you're like, well, I guess I have to make it now because 10 people know that, like, I've talked to 10 people and they now expect me to make something out of this. So kind of lock yourself in, Right. And then you have no choice but to make it. And that's, mostly a good thing. I don't know if that's a helpful tip or not. But
no, that's great. That's great. Grant Hill, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate you and your work on Serum.
Thanks so much, Tim, and I'm a big fan of the Trailer Park Podcast. So thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks for spending some time at the park. I hope that this episode demystified the concept of narrative, deeply investigative podcasts for you just a bit. We'd love to know your takeaways. Arielle and I will be back in your feed before you know it. Love this episode or TPP in general and want to get in touch? Email us at hello@trailerparkpod.com. Are you a creator? Submit your trailer by going to trailerparkpodcast.crd.co. Arielle and I are going through trailers right now for season 2, and we may just pick yours. Find us on Instagram and tag us in your favorite trailers. We're at trailerpark_pod. Happy trails!